Hello. Okay, so this is my first time using my new equipment that a supporter sent me. He gave me a box with headphones, camera, webcam, all sorts of stuff. And I'm super grateful for that. So hopefully this is the start, better production value. I want to start with thanking the most recent donors: Tim Pearson, Ricky Davis, Miguel J., Sheriff Samani, Susan Fenn, Tracy Whitney, Paul Rollerson, Crystal Maybe, Ricky Davis, and Neil Doran. Thank you guys for your contributions. Certainly allows me to continue to do this full time. Link for it is going to be in the comment section, pinned. And remember, for any time you send me a donation from this point forward, and even if you've done it in the past, anyone on that GoFundMe list will be put in the raffle every single week. Give signed packets of ibuprofen, signed Wasting Talent books, signed CD, or you'll be in line for when that releases. And grand prize, one pocket butthole every single week, a $20 value that I hope you fuck when you take home, and it's signed by me. So it's probably worth less because my signature devalues it because I'm a nobody. But anyhow, let's get into the story. And also, the signed ibuprofen, it's going to be numbered. It's a limited edition. I'm going to do 1,000 of them. I'm not selling them. Once I get my e-commerce site up with merchandise, I'm not selling the signed ibuprofen. That's a collector's item solely for raffle winners. That's it. I'm going to do 1,000 of them, and I'm not going to do them anymore. I'm not selling them. It's just for supporters. So, little limited edition signed ibuprofen. Okay, so this is going to be Juvenile Delinquency Part 3. When we left off last time, I had just got out of Roundup, which is essentially the orientation process of Aspen Ranch. Aspen Ranch, it was owned by I think it's called the Aspen Academy. It's like a conglomerate that owned all sorts of these weird institutions for troubled adolescents. And as I talked about in the second Juvenile Delinquency, a lot of my friends in Santa Barbara, because their family had money, this was like a convenient way to fix people that were going down a bad path, or at least that was probably what was pitched to our parents. And I have some of the promotional videos that they had sent, and it'll be in my documentary. This stuff is so corny, it's fucking criminal what these places got away with. And Aspen Ranch, the place I'm talking about now, has been shut down since because they got all sorts of lawsuits. I think some of the female kids that were there were getting molested by the staff and all sorts of weird stuff. It's kind of like cruel and unusual punishment. Some of their practices were very, very unorthodox and strange, and I know a lot of people that were there with me, watched the channel. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. So I'd gotten out of that initial roundup phase, and I was housed. I was on Team 2. So it was like this big building with different floors. There were 3 floors, Team 1, Team 2, Team 3. And I forget how many people were on each team, maybe 20? 20 sounds about right. First night I was there, putting away what little belongings I was allowed to have because they give you uniforms. I look out the barred window and I see Kyle O'Block, who became a good friend of mine. But he sees me and he's smoking a cigarette. I go back to sleep, he strangles me and tells me he's going to kill me if I tell anyone. So that was my first night on the actual team. At this place, you wake up at like 5 in the morning, and they take you to, you go to breakfast. Good breakfast. They had like a cereal bar, eggs, French toast, bacon, all that stuff. And then you go to school all day. It's a co-ed school. That's where the action goes down. It's a co-ed, program. So the guys and girls would meet up there, and guys would finger girls and whatever, PG-13 stuff. But that was going on. So at least it was co-ed. And anybody that knows crazy women knows that the crazier a woman is, the better they are in bed. Absolute fact of life. In my 34 years of life, I can vouch for that. Crazier the woman, better they are in bed. This was like a sea of crazy women. I guess they were teenage girls, but I was a teenage boy too, so it wasn't weird or anything. So we go to school all day. When you get done with school, you have to go to some sort of group therapy. And this whole program was centered under equine therapy, which means that you work with horses. Not just regular horses, junkie horses. And I forget what the term is because it was so long ago, but there's horses that get strung out on putting their mouths on like a wooden post and like making themselves hyperventilate, and they get high off it. So these were junkie horses, and we would like get assigned a horse to take care of, like junkie kids taking care of junkie horses. Seemed totally normal at the time, but in retrospect, a little odd. And group therapy, equine therapy, sometimes we would do like rope courses, and we'd do like trust exercises, and we would essentially have to give our confessionals and tell all of our secrets. And I mean, some of the stories, my God, some of the stuff that people would say. I mean, I never got molested. I don't wish that I had got molested. That's not, I didn't mean to say that, but I wish that I at least had a reason for all the pain that I put my parents through. I have the utmost empathy for people that are survivors of sexual abuse. Some of the stories that I would hear were absolutely horrific. And so we had to deal with that a lot. You know, they'd be like, yeah, you know, my uncle butt fucked me, or, you know, my sister sucked my dick or something, you know, some really crazy stuff like that. And then they'd get to me and I'd be like, yeah, my parents are rich and I'm just a spoiled little brat and I do a lot of drugs and I get expelled from school. I was like probably like the least problems out of all these people. So I started feeling, you know, that's when I got empathy for survivors of sexual abuse. And I'm always a proponent for laws for sex offenders being more stringent. I think it's incredibly disproportionate how we lock up nonviolent drug offenders for decades, but then you see all these people that are molesting kids and they get probation. It's totally, totally bizarre to me. That kid Brock Turner, who just, you know, he pretty much dragged a girl behind a dumpster and was like inserting stuff in her vagina, he got 3 months in county jail. I did 3 months one time on a prison violation at Lompoc when I met Big Meech, and that was for a non-conviction DUI. I didn't even get convicted. I beat the case, but just because I got cuffs put on me, I got the same amount of time that this guy, this piece of shit Brock Turner, dragged this girl behind a dumpster and was like sticking stuff in her vagina and taking pictures and like, oh yeah, look it, I'm hooking up with this girl. And then some like foreign exchange student, I think he was Russian, went by on a bike and saw it and he just beat the shit out of him. And Brock Turner, I hope karma gets you, you piece of shit, dude. Anybody that rapes a woman, molests a child, hurts an animal, hits a woman, you're a scumbag, point blank. And you know, growing up in Santa Barbara and not being in like these group therapeutic atmospheres, I thought that it was strange to be in these group therapies and have people having breakthroughs. And I was too immature to really understand the gravity of what they were saying. You know, kids that would get molested and then they were talking about cutting themselves because the physical pain distracted the emotional pain, and physical pain's easier to process than emotional pain. And I just thought they were weirdos back then. But now that I'm older and I'm a little more mature, I'm not claiming to be mature, but I look back and I really do have great empathy for these people, and I feel so bad for anyone that had to experience that. I'm sure a lot of people that watch my channel has been molested or raped. The odds that that's happened to you if you turned into a drug addict are pretty high. If you look at the statistics for drug addicts, and I think it's over 80% had some sort of abuse or sexual survivors, and it was my first experience with that. So I got into this routine where I'm waking up, I'm going to school, and the kind of school that they had there was like these little packets that you would do at your own pace. So like, say like biology. You'd get a chapter in the biology book, you'd have to do a packet, and then you take a proctored test, which means a supervised test, and then you would accumulate credits and they would go through towards your diploma. I think I ended with like a 3.2 altogether, and only because I had gone to these programs in my youth. Just by, you know, I ditched school so frequently that I was never able to get good grades. But in this, I actually was able to self-teach myself a lot of classes, and I'm actually really grateful for that looking back. My parents, you know, in hindsight, I can look back and see that my parents saw I was deviating from a path, and they cared enough to put me in a place like this where I could get my education and try to figure out some of the root causes for some of my impulsivity problems. Very soon after I got there, they diagnosed me with oppositional defiancy, which means that you have like a very almost pathological response to authority figures. So you're anti-authoritarian inherently. And oppositional defiancy is something that a lot of adolescents get. And if it's not treated, if you can't treat that compulsion to try to subvert any authority figure or rebel. I mean, a lot of teenagers rebel, and that's just rebellion. But then there's people like me who there's this pathological response. That's oppositional defiancy, and it turns into antisocial behavioral disorder. That's what it is when you're an adult. And coincidentally, the biggest commonality amongst prisoners in the world, at any prison, anybody that's a career criminal or convict is having antisocial behavioral disorder. And I remember we're doing an interview for Penthouse magazine. Jim Olds, the screenwriter of Fight Club, was being interviewed, and Will De Los Santos, screenwriter of Spun. Tony O'Neill, one of my favorite novelists, he wrote a book called Sick City. You guys should definitely check that out. It's a badass book. It's like one of my favorite books. He's one of my best friends. I'm collaborating on a screenplay with him right now. All these guys were, doing interview questions about me for Penthouse. The guy that was interviewing him was Seth Ferrante. He's also a good friend of mine. He did 21 years in federal prison, and he turned into a journalist. Now he's a filmmaker. He just did the White Boy documentary about White Boy Rick, the 17-year-old that got a life sentence selling crack in Detroit. He did the documentary about him. It's on Stars right now, and he's going places. And him and I have a lot of plans for the future. He's one of the executive producers for my documentary, Seth Ferrante. And he had written an article for Penthouse about me with all the aforementioned people. And my dad had said that I had antisocial behavioral disorder. And I remember Jim Olds had said, hey, I don't know if we should put that in there because that's synonymous with sociopathy, right? And we didn't want people to think that I was sociopathic because that means that you lack empathy. And that's not the case with me. Even though I was diagnosed as oppositional defiant as a youth, and even though I grew into antisocial behavioral disorder, it's something that you can get out of. And I think I got out of it a few years ago when I started looking at law enforcement as not all bad people. I mean, I unequivocally hated cops up until a few years ago. Now my view on it, I think there's a lot of bad cops, and I love that the advent of technology has illuminated police brutality, and there's a lot of police corruption. Every time I hear that some poor unarmed black guy got shot in some weird hick town, it literally breaks my heart. I hate it. But I've matured to the point where I don't generalize that. But back then, that's how I thought. I hated all authority. If you're a teacher, if you're whatever, I hated authority figures. So we didn't say that I had antisocial behavioral disorder in that article, and I'm glad we didn't because I don't think I have it anymore. And if you research it and you Google it and read about it, it is something that you can grow out of, and I think that I have, just with life experiences, but some people never do. And that keeps you in and out of prison. So I remember one of the first things I got in trouble for, I'm kind of getting in the loop. Now, the thing about this program is there's a lot of, like I said, really emotionally unhinged people with eating disorders, bulimic, anorexic, self-mutilators. There was a guy, like I said, his name was Darren, and there was this rumor that he was there because he fucked his neighbor's dog, and they had to stitch the dog back together. And speaking of fucking, one of the third nights I was there, I remember this guy, his name was I think it was Timmy. Timmy was his name. And Timmy comes up to me, he's like, hey man, have you lost your yeats? I'm like, my yeats? What's that? And the imagery in my mind was Quaker Oats for some reason. I thought it was the Quaker Oats guy. I'm like, I don't know what yeats are. And he's like, have you been butt fucked? I'm like, butt fucked? No. By a dude? And he's like, yeah, that's losing your yeats. And I'm like, dude, no, I still have my yeats, and my yeats are going nowhere. He's like, yeah, I lost my yeats 16 times this year. And then he like walked away, and I was like, oh my God. And you know, he's in his little Aspen Ranch uniform, but you know the type. Black fingernails, wears the choker, cuts himself because his dad yells at him, that kind of guy. Going around on some yeet losing marathon somewhere. He's probably getting his yeets lost as we speak. Somewhere. Probably at some goth club in like Houston or something. But it's like, these are the kind of people that I'm around in there. And they're really cool people. I'm not saying that like I was the only like druggy party kid person. There was definitely other people like that. But there was also some weirdos like Darren, who may or may not have had sex with a dog, which, you know, I've done some scumbag things in my time, admittedly, but dog fucking's a deal breaker. I mean, that's like a line that I think no human being should ever cross. It's absolutely absurd. But we heard that he had done that. And what the story behind that was, is there was something called an impact letter, where, see, a lot of people at this place were pathological liars. So people weave narratives about themselves. You know, it's like if you're in rehab or you're in jail or prison, you can be anyone you want to be. You can just make up a whole story about yourself, and people usually don't believe you because it sounds like bullshit, but people do that all the time. The point of the impact letter was it told the truth about who you are, why you're really there. On my impact letter, my dad told the story about how I crashed the car, I was hallucinating on Marazine and seeing like these hallucinatory Asian kids and, you know, all that stuff. The crash car and how I'd gotten expelled from 3 schools within the span of a month, fist fights, reckless sex, acid, mushrooms. You know, mine was like, I was like, all right, well, I have a pretty solid impact letter. Rumor had it that this kid, Darren, had been babysitting his neighbor's dogs, Chihuahua. Oh, like this story came with that. Like people knew like the type of dog and everything. And he had sex with the dog so many times the dog had to get stitches. Now I don't know if that's true. I don't know if these claims were ever substantiated, but the way that it was presented to me was that this is what he, you know, because you have to read your impact letter in front of people, and it basically says like what you're there for and what's really going on. And supposedly like 6 months before I got there, you know, he had read his impact letter and there was Chihuahua fucking involved. I don't know if it's true or not, but, you know, there's that guy, there's another guy named Clay who like acted super autistic. Like he acted autistic, but we were all told that he was just a brilliant con artist, you know, and like, you know, he'd be like, hug me, and like have like the prettiest girls hug him. He'd be like, thank you. He talked like Pee Wee Herman. You're pretty. But then like people would say that like once in a while like he'd slip and he'd just be like, hey, anybody know where I can get a Marlboro Red? And he wasn't really like the hey, hug me guy. But that's like, it was some weird facade. I'll never forget this guy, Clay. And so I'm getting into the daily, you know, the daily routine of being at this place. Waking up, going to school, going to therapy, trying as hard as I can not to leave my yeets anywhere, you know? And I made friends, and you know, there you could skateboard there, and I was into skating at the time. They had a fun box, and like that was like my therapy while I was there. I would just go to the basketball court. They had a little fun box set up, and I'd go, you know, do my little nollie 5-0s or whatever. I was okay at skating, but that was like really where I found my solace at this place. And 420 was coming up, and so I started telling everyone that we should have a 420 toga party, like an Animal House. We should all be butt naked and wear togas, and we should just like, you know, riot and rage and like protest. And I started telling everyone about it, all the girls, all the guys, we're gonna do this big toga party and just like revolt. And somehow the staff had found out about it, and I had to go to that place called Reflections that I talked about, which is like the whole of this place, because they said that I was trying to incite a riot. And you have to sit at Reflections, so it's like these rows of chairs, and they give you, as I mentioned before, these arbitrary assignments, like, why is the sky blue? Write a 15-page essay or 10-page essay about why the sky is blue. Like these things that would antagonize you on purpose, and until you like conformed and stopped resisting, they wouldn't let you go, and you'd get sentenced to hours. They gave me like 7 days of Reflections for trying to incite a riot. The whole time I'm there, I'm like talking shit to the guy that's like sitting at the front desk, like that like watches us, because we have to like sit there, and then if we talk to anyone, we get more hours. If we're defiant, we get more hours. And you know, I would like talk shit to this guy. I'd be like, fuck you. He's like, it's another day. I'm like, you're a bitch. Yeah, it's 3 more days. I'm like, ugh. And like eventually I just stopped. It was like I had like 19 days to go. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm just gonna stop. And I remember he told me, he's like, you know, you're the kind of kid that's gonna wind up in prison someday. I was like, prison? Like, bro, for what? Because I take acid and like, and go to parties. And he's like, no, because you're the kind of guy that thinks he knows everything, and you can't conform to authority at all. Basically saying about the oppositional defiancy thing. I was like, whatever. But irony, spoiler alert, I've been to prison 3 times since then, and he was right. I did. I had this like cloak of invisibility and like this weird pumped up self-esteem because I was so insecure. And I think that was one of my big problems. ADD, and I got held back a grade. Remember I said my friends were finger banging girls, and I was going on field trips to like the local aquarium, and it was like very hard on me. And then my ADD and like having specialized learning, having to adapt to that, I was just a really insecure person. So I try to compensate, as insecure people do, by giving my yeats away to every single adult. No, I'm just kidding. By, you know, just having this like bloated and inflated superego, a lot of attention-seeking behavior. And I didn't understand, when you're that age, you can't internalize this and you can't process it and know that the reason that you're doing this is because you don't feel good about yourself. You just want attention, and sometimes negative attention feels just as good as regular attention if you don't know the difference. And it took me a long, long, long time to figure that all out. So I was in reflections for like 19 days or whatever. Now, the way that this program worked is they had level systems. I don't know if I talked about that in the other video. I don't watch my videos after I post them, so I don't remember like what I had mentioned or what I had. They had different levels. The first level is called a Mustang. Everybody is a Mustang no matter what, okay? And you have no special privileges. Second level is called a Maverick, and it's still no privileges, but it's a necessary level to ascend to be able to get to the better levels. Now, levels you want to be is the third level is called a Greenhorn. Greenhorn, you're allowed, if your family comes to visit, you can actually leave the premise for a day. You get like a day pass, not an overnight, but you can like, you know, you can go out, and then you can also go anywhere you want without staff if you're with a rider, which is the level 4. A rider has like, you know, the most privileges. They get to have late nights. Kyle was a rider, even though he's smoking cigarettes and strangling me. But like, you wanted to get up to rider. They would give you like, they would take you to like, you know, amusement parks and bowling and all these cool trips if you're a rider, but like nobody else could do that. And then there was one level above that called a Wrangler, and you could like get a job outside of this program, and you could like have a car and stuff, and nobody had that. I think one person had that, and he'd been there like 4 years. But like, the rider was the one you wanted to get to, the level 4, and there's maybe only like 7 of them on the entire place. So to get these levels, you have to do well in your therapy, to do well in school. It's multifaceted. You have to like be excelling in different areas, and each one had like a different core principle. I think like, you know, Mustang was like, I forget what Mustang was, but it was like humility. And then Maverick is honesty, and Greenhorn's ownership, and Rider is like not accountability, I forget what it was, but you know, it was that kind of stuff, gratitude or whatever. And you had to like master that particular core principle. To get from a Mustang to a Maverick, you just had to fill out an application, give it to the person that's running your team. It's like a 25-year-old that works for this place, and they can approve you. Anything above the second level, the Greenhorn and the Rider, you actually have to go to a committee, and you have to sit. It's like a fucking parole board. Now that I've been to prison, it's like a parole board, right? You sit in this room, and there's like 5 or 6 of these people, and you plead your case. Your team manager has to like put you in to go to, I think it's called council or committee, whatever it was. Then they have to approve you. It's very hard to become a Greenhorn. It's even harder to become a Rider. So I was kind of stuck at Mustang for a while, and then you know, because I was getting in trouble with the inciting riots. I got caught kissing a girl a couple times. I never got in a fight in the beginning. So I think that I had only gotten caught kissing girls, and I got caught huffing paint. That was a big one I did, trying to incite a riot. And so I got stuck at like Mustang for a few months. Finally, I made it up to Maverick. I started doing better, and like now I had a group of friends. I mean, anywhere I go, I always find a group of people that are kind of like-minded, and you know, I'm grateful to experience. Even though a lot of these things were shitty, I have these like groups of friends all over the country that I made years and years ago, and now with social media, we're all interconnected, and I think it's awesome. So I had a group of friends there. So I went up to Maverick, and then one day, I was up in the school area. Now, you can't use a phone, you can't call your family or friends. You're only allowed to call your parents once a week with a therapist. You have like an individualized therapist, and every time I called my parents, I'd be like, help me, get me out of here, they're molesting me. And they just hang up on me, and the therapist would be like, yes, he's trying to, I mean, God forbid I really was getting molested. I wasn't, but I mean, you know, that was like my ploy in the beginning, and so I would never use the calls to actually like process stuff. I was always like accusing them of beating me, molesting me, like all sorts of stuff, and it just didn't work. Finally, I started taking it more seriously, and my parents would tell me how it was affecting them, and we started trying to work through some of this stuff. So I had become a Maverick, and one day I'm up at the school area, and usually when a class is in session, they lock the door. Well, I saw that the door was open, and there was nobody in there. And so I walked in, and I saw a phone, you know, like a landline. I picked it up, and I called my friend Wyatt. And I was like, hey, bro. He's like, Ryan? I'm like, yeah. He's like, man, where are you? I'm like, dude, I'm in Loa, Utah right now. And I was like telling him about like people losing their yeats, and he's like, what the fuck are yeats? I'm like, dude, it's like some hip butt fuck slang for like troubled adolescents. He's like, Jesus, bro, you got to get out of there. I'm like, can you come get me? He's like, I'd have to borrow my mom's station wagon, maybe. And then like I heard like, you know, footsteps down the hall. I'm like, I gotta go, bro. He's like, okay, cool. I hang up, and so like I had figured, I'm like, man, I got away with a phone call, but ownership is the greenhorn core principle. If I go tell on myself to the staff, it's like, you know, it's a gambit, and it's contrived, but if I come clean, maybe it's just such a big thing, such a big admission that maybe they'll advance me to the next level. So that was my logic. So I went and I told one of the therapists, and it's just like, wow, man, I got to applaud you for your honesty. It's amazing work, Ryan. You came in here a disgruntled, angry teenager, and you're blossoming into a trustworthy man. I'm like, yeah, I just, you know, it was eating at my conscience, man. He's like, it's great. He's like, you know what? I think you should have to do a little community service, for a little punishment, clean some of the phones, but I'm going to make a recommendation that you go for greenhorn. Even though you made a mistake, you took it on the chin, you admitted it, and I think you're greenhorn material. I'm like, okay, man, yeah, cool. So I remember my parents were coming to see me, like, you know, maybe like a week after this. So I really wanted to be greenhorn so that I would get that visit where I could go like off the property of this place. And I had gone a week before this to committee. My team manager put me in for it, and they had denied me. And I cried. I remember crying. I just broke down crying. I was more emotional back then. I wasn't as callous. And I started crying. I remember leaving, and I was like wiping my tears. And I remember some girl saw me. She's like, oh, honey, are you okay? And I'm just like, I don't want to talk. They denied me for greenhorn. And she's like, she went in there and she got approved, and she came out, she's like, they approved me. And I'm like, ugh, fucking bitch. And, you know, so like I was like really brokenhearted because I wanted to go, but now they put me in for greenhorn again because I had admitted very strategically that, you know, I'd use the phone, hoping that it would play out exactly the way that it did. So now they recommended me to go to council again, or committee, or whatever it's called. I go in there and they're like, listen, we just want to applaud you for your honesty. Ryan, the work that you're doing is A+. You're an example to others. Even though you made a mistake and you didn't follow the rules, you promptly admitted it because you knew that it was wrong. And we're going to approve you for greenhorn. So I became greenhorn, and like all the other guys that I was friends with, were just like, Jesus, dude, I cannot believe you hustled them out of the greenhorn. That's just ridiculous, you know? And they were kind of mad, you know? You know how people get. They're like kind of hating a little bit. But so I was greenhorn, my parents came to visit me, and I got to go on this trip. And it was cool. Like now I was a greenhorn, and when I got that status, so there's maybe like 5 riders. I don't know how many people were at this place, how many kids at the time. I want to say maybe like 100, 150. I have no idea. This is in 2001. It's a long time ago. But, you know, there's 5 riders, and there's probably 15 greenhorns. I mean, it was like a prestigious thing. You know, they didn't give it out that easily. I was really happy. And once I made that level, I started really kind of trying harder, or at least faking it till I made it type thing, where I was like, you know, standing up and volunteering when we were doing meetings, like, hey, I'll moderate this meeting. You know, I was like giving speeches, telling people my story, and like I became kind of like a rising star there. And I remember we had this night staff. So there was always night staff, right? And Kyle LeBlanc, the guy that had been smoking, you know, I'd asked him, I said, hey, how did you get the cigarette? I want a cigarette too. And he's like, man, sometimes the night staff just hook me up. You know, like, if you know, I've been here for a long time, if you get good enough, if you get cool with them enough, they'll hook you up like that. So he turned 18, and this guy was like a career program kid. Like he was in and out of these programs for troubled adolescents, like for like the last 3 or 4 years, like since he was like 14 or something. He was legendary. He went to Mount Bachelor, and he escaped, and he like went to a gas station and like broke the window and stole cartons of cigarettes, and then just sat by the train tracks and smoked cigarettes till he got caught. Straight legend in the sent away program kid community. And I also heard that he had like hit someone with a fire poker. I don't know. I'm friends with him on Facebook. I need to ask him about it. He just sent me a picture the other day, the one that I posted on Juvenile Delinquency too. But he was cool. You know, we became really good friends. He was really into like industrial rock, and I was like into that at that time. We like loved 9 Inch Nails. I still like 9 Inch Nails, but I was like going through that phase at that time. And he was turning 18, so he was leaving the next day. So I remember I woke up in the middle of the night, and he slept in the same room as me. There was like 4 or 5 kids, 4 or 5 beds, and we all had, you know, we all slept in the same room. There's multiple rooms on the floor that we were on for Team 2. Woke up probably like midnight, and he wasn't in his bed. I knew he was getting out the next day. So I got up, I was like in my pajamas, and I'm kind of just like floating down the hall, and I see that the emergency exit, which has an alarm on it, is open, and there's a foot in it, so somebody's outside. So I think it's him. I'm like, man, what's he doing? So, and I look, and like usually the night staff's in this little office, and I checked to see if the night staff was there, and they weren't. So I just kind of tiptoeing down the hall in my pajamas, just kind of floating along. And I open the door, and I see Kyle smoking a cigarette. And like there's 3 night staff, and they're all just chopping it up. Now he just turned 18. It's illegal for him to do that. I think it might have been 21 though in Utah at that time. I don't remember. It was like 18 in most states. But he's smoking a cigarette, and they all look at me, and he looks at me, and he's just kind of like smiling, smoking a cigarette. Like, yeah. The staff looks mortified. You know, they're just like, get inside. You're not supposed to be here. I'm like, okay. Oh. So I go back inside, and I'm like laying in bed. I'm like, damn, that's crazy. They were just giving Kyle a cigarette. And so I go back.